In this episode, we're talking with auctioneer Andy Reid, and we go to explore auctions from the inside. We'll learn the mistakes buyers make that lead them to pay more than they thought they would, and the other side of the coin, how much money do vendors leave on the table due to poor auctioning practices? If you've ever wondered how to get an edge in an auction, this is the episode to listen to.
Welcome to The Elephant in the Room. This is the podcast where we love to talk about the big things in property that never usually get talked about. I'm Veronica Morgan, real estate agent, buyer's agent and buyer's agent mentor, co-host of Foxtel's Location Australia, author of Auction Ready and co-host of Your First Home Buyer Guide.
And I'm Chris Bates, mortgage broker, recently ranked number 5 in Australia out of over 18,000 brokers in the annual MPA Top 100 Mortgage Broker Awards. Before we get started, I need to let you know that nothing we say here can be taken as personal advice. We always recommend you engage the services of an appropriate and experienced professional.
Our guest today is Andy Reid, winner of REB's Australian Auctioneer of the Year Award in 2022. Andy owns a freelancing auctioneering business serving over 130 agents/agencies with a team of 5 auctioneers covering Metro Melbourne. Now, he is also known as a sales coach and has previously worked as the head of training for a major franchise network across Australasia. And Andy has a passion around the practicality of emotional intelligence in the real estate business. And today we're interested in delving into the psychology of auctions. Thank you so much for coming along today, Andy. Welcome to The Elephant in the Room.
Absolute pleasure to be on this show. I've been listening to this thing for a little while, so I feel somewhat privileged.
Excellent. Well, at least you've listened to some episodes. Some of our guests come on totally raw. They've got no idea what to expect. So tell me, let's really lift the lid on this whole auction thing, because it's been some time since we've interviewed an auctioneer, and I always enjoy these conversations. And if anyone doesn't know, I wrote a book called Auction Ready, all about auctions, and I find them fascinating. I go to them whether I'm bidding or not. I find them fascinating. So let's open with this question to you, Andy. Is it true that the buyer with the deepest pockets always wins the auction?
No, absolutely not. There are so many other variables that are at play. I say it regularly. The numbers, I actually say this during auctions, the numbers are almost secondary to the psychology of the whole thing. On countless occasions, I've seen buyers, bidders, that whether they've done it on purpose or not, they've spooked out or they've outwitted or whatever it is, buyers that have clearly got deeper pockets. But, whether it's through sheer determination or blind luck or whatever, they end up coming out on top. So, it's very much, it's much more than the numbers. And that's the same with anything with real estate, though, to be fair. Even though, like in a private sale environment, even though the numbers take a lot more of a precedence in that scenario, things like time, like selling periods and conditions and all that sort of stuff contribute to the strength of said offer, right? So it's never all about the numbers.
Now, during auction, I watch people, and when I'm not bidding, it's great because I've got no skin in the game, right? So I can watch how people bid. As an auctioneer, you're there.
With the popcorn. Yeah, you get the popcorn out.
Yeah. I've got my popcorn. I'm my 3D glasses on. As an auctioneer, you got a bird's eye seat, right? You're standing there and you're running the show. You're in control, hopefully, because some auctioneers aren't. But anyway, that's another. We'll get to that, I guess. You're in control. You're watching for all these signs, right? Now, obviously, the auctioneer is looking for somebody who's intimidating somebody who might have deeper pockets. So your job is actually make sure that person with the deeper pockets doesn't get intimidated. You've got to pick up all this stuff, right? How do you do that?
Look, from a very, very young age, I was taught to pay attention to what's actually happening, not just what's being said. And this was like when I was at primary school. My parents were both police officers. So, their skeptical nature really sort of trained me to keep an eye out for what is actually going on. And you'll find that in an auction scenario, there's so much that goes on with the whole body language thing. I'm sure that your audience would have heard umpteen number of times, like 93% of our communication is done through body language and movements and energy and all that sort of stuff. There's only 7% that's done by the verbiage that comes out of people's mouths. So And realistically now, with the multicultural element that is in the buying audience, there's a lot of people that don't speak at all anyway, because either they can't, English is their second language, or they're freaking out because, let's face it, it's really scary saying stuff in front of a load of people. So a lot of people freak out just because of the fact that it's practically public speaking. And then throw in the element that they're trying to buy a house at the same time. So you've got a lot of it is a bit of a subconscious working out of energies and all that sort of stuff. But I found that, and this is where I've been studying different cultures and their different nuances with regards to body language and things like that. Because a lot of the time you can see what they're saying without needing to understand their language. And it's really important that you do that, man, especially right now.
When you say especially right now, what do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is the fact that you could probably have 5 bidders speaking 5 different languages at you.
Right.
And so, so it's through no bias or prejudice or anything like that. It's literally the fact that you could have 5 different nationalities. And none of them could have English as their first language, and yet we're all trying to work to a common outcome. So we've got to find some common ground there somewhere.
So look, many buyers hate auctions, and for one of the reasons that you've just raised there, it is performative, and some people are sort of outgoing and confident in their nature, and that they find it easier than others. But it's also a method of sale recommended by agents to vendors to maximise the sale price. So there's another good reason why buyers might, understandably resist going to auction if they can, try to make pre-auction offers, etc. But sometimes an auction is actually more advantageous for the buyer than for the seller. So I guess, can you give us some examples of how this can play out?
Well, the one true statement of an auction is the fact that buyers can see what other buyers are offering in an auction. And in a private sale, the amount of times when I was an agent that we'd have multiple offer scenarios, and you can tell buyers until you're blue in the face as an agent that there are other offers, and you're going to need to make sure it's your best offer because it's going to be best offer wins. And then as soon as they lose, they'll turn around to you and say, well, I could have offered another 10K. Well, then who's that helping? And it's a real issue. And look, let's face it, we as an industry, we're our own worst enemy, because the amount of times that agents say, oh, there's another offer coming in, and the thing's been on the market for 6 months. It's like waiting forever for a bus, and then magically 2 turn up at the same time. Come on, man. Let's quit
real.
that nonsense. So, I mean, who falls for that shit now? Let's face it. But it's because of things like that and situations like that as a buyer, providing that obviously I've done my homework, because a lot of the anxiety is the fear of the unknown. In fact, all of it is. Outside of the one big anxiety, which is what I need to pay in order to get the thing, everything else is just fear of the unknown. And as long as a buyer, you've got yourself prepped with regards to your finance, and you know your limit, and you've done your homework, and you've done your homework with the agent and the auctioneer, which is really important, which I'm sure we'll probably chat about in a bit, you're way better off going to an auction because you know exactly what's happening in real time. And there's no faffing around. Like with private sale, you could be going for days messing about with that carry on. So yeah, I can totally appreciate the performative piece. It is daunting. And we as professionals, we can never lose sight of that, because we're all like gun-ho trying to make sure that the transaction's getting sorted. But ultimately, you kind of need those humans to be on board with you in order to make that transaction happen. So we can't lose sight of the seriousness of what's going on. You know, like I said, public speaking is second to death, apparently, in terms of fear factor. And then you throw in the fact that these people are trying to move their lives forward, right? Start a whole new chapter of their lives. It's a pressure cooker and a half. So you got to appreciate that. And I think we as professionals need to probably articulate that and actually demonstrate that we get it. We know that you're shitting yourself and whatnot. That's fine. Focus on the task at hand, and we'll all be okay.
Now, most sales agents are not auctioneers. right? So they
That
normally
is true.
mostly would bring in,
So true.
yeah, they'll bring in a specialist. And even those ones that are auctioneers, it's interesting. There's not many of those are great. But anyway, great auctioneers, that is. So the auctioneer turns up, doesn't know the buyers, doesn't know the vendor normally, doesn't know the property. You've got literally minutes to get up to speed, right? So how does a good auctioneer provide value for money under those circumstances?
Well, for a start for 10, if you're only giving yourself a few minutes to get your homework done, then you're not a professional auctioneer, first and foremost, right? I often joke that I live a rock star lifestyle because on a Friday night when people are off on the piss or off to watch the footy or anything like that, I've got my head buried in contracts, learning about the property, because for as far as I'm concerned, I can't sell what I don't know. And I'm selling someone's biggest asset. And if I've not got the wherewithal to learn my product before I go out there to try and sell it for a life-changing sum of money, then I need to put the hammer down and walk off and go do something else, go work at Coles or something, because that's all part of the professionalism.
What are you learning from the contract? And look, I'll just preface this by listeners need to understand that the legislation and contracts are different in every state and territory in this country. Mm-hmm. Victoria has a certain amount of vendor disclosure. Every state and territory has vendor disclosure. There's certain things that will be in a contract that are different from state to state. So what is it? And also the auctioneer has certain responsibilities around the contract too that a normal sales agent won't have. So what do you learn from spending time reading those contracts?
Well, in terms of the rules and regs of code of conduct for auctions and whatnot, you're absolutely spot on to point that out. Every state is different. And ironically, I was having a chat to the president of the Real Estate Institute of Australia on just a couple of days ago. And I was saying, any chance that we can have a little bit of uniformity, that would be fabulous. But that's like getting the biggest room of egos known to man to agree on anything, right? So that's like nigh on impossible, bless. So in terms of what I'm learning about the contracts, it's not about the rules and regs, because shit, if I don't know that, then I really need to check myself in. But with respect to the particulars of the property, things that I'm always looking at are things that I know with the experience I've had that a potential buyer could ask. So, for example, it could be things like owner's court fees if it's an apartment or a unit on a multi-unit site. It could be easements if it's a potential development site, where that easement is, because that's obviously going to affect planning and design for a townhouse development, for example. Okay. It could be the zoning of the property, because certain zonings only allow for single dwelling opportunities. So, because it'll be a low density zone or something like that. And so there's all sorts of little nuances that come with each property that, depending on the type of property that I am in front of, when I'm calling the show, I need to be aware of 100%. So, for example, a really good one is, say, for example, if a subdivisional property or potential subdivisional property has got no easements on it, although for me, that's a selling point. And for a lot of marketing, people won't realize that.
Yeah, which is that, but doesn't that say a lot about sales agents? Because in reality, that's what the sales agent should be doing. And that's what the sales agent should be communicating and responding to throughout the auction campaign. And by the time, and then the buyer, if they're serious about buying, should have done all their due diligence and shouldn't be asking the auctioneer those questions. Do you get those questions often during an auction?
You can do if it's something that's a bit curly that may derail the auction, right? So it's not just about knowing my product that I need to sell, because we've got to be real here, especially in 2024 so far, the number of buyers that have seen a property for the first time in the half an hour before that have then got involved in the bidding is actually quite high right now, as far as my observations have shown. So that's point one. I need to be able to sell that stuff. yes, it's the sales agent's responsibility, but I'm an extension of that sales team, right? So if I don't know the stuff that needs to be known, then I'm at a disadvantage for my salesperson that I'm representing and the brand that I'm representing at that time, right? It's a professionalism thing. I mean, my father-in-law was my first boss in real estate. My former father-in-law was my first boss in real estate. And in many respects, he was a pain in the ass. But one thing that I'll always be grateful for is that he made damn sure that whenever we got a contract whenever we got a Section 32, which is the legal bits and bobs in Victoria, he would make damn sure that before we went and even took it out for a drive and inspection with the buyer, we had a flick through the contract. We understood what was going on in the black and white of it all, right? So it was really important that I think that's something that everybody should do. I mean, it freaks me out that some people don't know, for example, the difference between a strata and a stratum title with the old school apartments in your St Kilda East and those sorts of things, right?
Yep.
That for me is basic professionalism. Right? So from a sales or auctioneer point of view. But when it comes to the auction scene in my responsibility around those sorts of things, for example, a really good example was an auction that I had for an apartment on Flinders Lane a few years ago. And that had an astronomical owner's court. It was like 13 or 14 grand a year. Now, the agent had done the right thing and told everybody, made everybody aware that that's what it was, and they were due to have a massive excess on it because the lift needed redoing or something. And the agent said to me, Andy, there is going to be a buyer that is going to ask you that question because I can tell they're going to be a pain in the ass about it, and they're going to try and make people freak out about the volume of money that's going to need to be outlaid. And sure as eggs is eggs, that's exactly what happened. And if I didn't know the details of the contract, then I'd have looked like an idiot. I'd have just stood there looking like a stunned mullet because I'd be like, oh, shit. Okay. So I needed to be prepped and ready to go. When it comes to any auctioneer worth their salt should be going through a contract and looking for any chink in the armor, any sort of chink in the armor that can be used as it can be used as a weapon against you when it comes to getting as much money as you possibly can. And that's the way that I look at it, right?
And look, from my view, I mean, when I was a sales agent as well, I mean, the husband of one of the owners of the business was a lawyer, and we used to get schooled on that stuff as well, right? And that has carried me into my buyer's agency business. And from the flip side, buyers need to be looking for those chinks in the armor as well, because they could be deal breakers, or they could be reasons why not to pay too much money for property, and reasons why also to look at other buyers and think, do they know that? And if they don't know that and they're paying a certain price, you need to be really wary of that. But so back to the auction setup. So you rock up, and then an agent's going to give you a quick briefing as well, right? The agent's going to tell you who's there. Now, in Victoria, of course, you don't register to bid. That's a bit of a disadvantage that you're at. We certainly in New South Wales and in most other states, you have to register. So that's great. You get that last minute. You know exactly who's able to bid. They won't always bid, but at least you know who is in a position to bid. Whereas in Victoria, obviously, you're still running a bit blind the way it was when I first started in real estate. So what's the sort of the lowdown that a good agent will give you to set you up so that you are best able to work that crowd?
Yeah, Victoria is a little bit of a bone of contention for me that we don't register bidders. It is because we're the only state that doesn't, and that is a pain. That is pretty painful. It's painful for the agent. It creates a little bit more fun for me because that unknown factor makes it a lot more entertaining for me at times, to be honest. But that's just me being me.
It's you.
But so the information that I generally tend to get is, it depends on the quality of the agent. Now, I work with all sorts of different agents of all sorts of different calibers, and some are great, some are not so great, and some, bless them, I kind of wonder sometimes how they get dressed in the morning. But most of my agents, thankfully, are in in the former category. So what I'll find out are things like whether they've got the sense that this is going to be, they're going to be a front runner. They're going to be a front runner. They should be here towards the end. These guys are going to bid, but I don't think they've got the budget to see it through. Those sorts of things, right? Now, in the time before an auction begins, if we get a chance to, I'll go and actively engage with one or two of at least the front runners, and just shake their hand, break the ice before I have to break the ice. So I'll go and shake their hand and say hello and introduce myself and let them know that I'm not scary. I'm not this big alpha gorilla thing that you can't work with and whatnot, because there's no point trying to intimidate buyers until they're in the game, or trying to get them in. There's no point trying to be all chest beaty and whatnot until they're actually involved in the auction.
You're trying to disarm them. You're trying to do quite the opposite, right?
But that's one of the biggest. That's one of the most common mistakes that gets made. It's one of the most common ones by auctioneers, by some agents, bless them, because and this is where agents have a little bit of a challenge, right? Because their job, they need to get them excited and have that nervous energy so that they do get involved in it, and that nervous energy allows them to get over any apprehension that they have, to get involved in the auction. But there's a fine line between creating that nervous energy, that twitch response, and just completely turning people off. And a lot of agents will get it right until it comes to the day, and then there'll just be this inability to have the right push and pull with a buyer, so that they feel that they can get involved, or that they should get involved. All right, but auctioneers, you see it happen so many times when it comes to auctioneers, that they bless them, they think that they have to throw the kitchen sink at people from minute one, and they'll stand there, and the silence. Like, I'm a massive advocate of silence in an auction. I think silence can be your most powerful weapon as an auctioneer. But when you're doing it right at the very start, when no one's doing anything, and sometimes it's really cringeworthy, because it's not helping anyone. It's just making you look like an idiot if you just stood there as an auctioneer being silent and not doing any attempt to resell, because you haven't learned about the property and you don't know the particular things. And that's something else that an agent will tell me. I'll ask the agent, what are the biggest things that buyers are looking for out of this thing? Like, what's the biggest selling points according to buyers, so that I can really sort of turn the screw on them and try and reiterate to people the reason why they're even stood in front of me in the first place. But yeah, that starting point is very, very interesting, and having as much intel as I can from agents is really important. It's something I encourage massively.
So, I mean, I agree with you. I think a lot of auctioneers don't use silence during the auction. It's been interesting sometimes when I have been bidding at an auction, and I've actually said to some auctioneers, you know what, if you actually just were quiet for a minute, I might be able to get a word in, like I might actually be able to bid, but you haven't shut up, So sometimes a bit of a laugh about that. But other times, as you say, you've got to have that, how you started off, and you've got to have, that's all well rehearsed. They've got they're like great comedians, they can deal with hecklers, right? So you've got a line for everybody, and you can roll with it and get the crowd going. And obviously that's important for getting that momentum. But obviously, too, you need momentum, because you basically need people in the fray, don't you? And so I'm guessing, I've never done it, but I'm guessing it's almost like, I've said like a comedian, but also like a conductor, an orchestra. You got to keep the instruments playing, right? So how do you manage that pace and that momentum? Because you've got to keep it going, because the silence can also be a bit damaging in the middle at the wrong spot. How do you avoid that?
Yeah, like I said, silence is a weapon that can turn on you if you're not careful, and especially at the start when you're hoping that someone's going to do something, right? And because what silence can do if it's used at the wrong time is it can actually increase the anxiety in the bidding population, because that silence acts as a pressure cooker. And a lot of auctioneers will be silent because they're hoping that pressure cooker is going to make one of the bidders crack. And what it can do is actually do the opposite, which is make people very, very aware that nothing's happening.
It's social
and if
proof.
Nothing's happening, I don't want to be the first to make it happen.
Yeah,
exactly.
I don't want to be the only idiot that's interested.
Exactly. It's like one of the most common analogies that I used to describe that is it's like kids, it's like the kids around the disco dance floor, right? No kid wants to be the first one on, and because it's generally the first kid that does the knee slide to begin with is generally tends to have the most fun. But until that point, you'll see the boys on one side and the girls on the other side, and no two shall mix, especially like primary school stuff. You know what I mean? And so, but that's essentially what it boils down to.
A real estate auction to a primary school disco.
Sometimes
I think it is.
Honestly, the equivalent emotions are entirely relevant. They are entirely relevant because it's all about public judgment. And we feel that from a very, very young age when we're little kids. And a lot of people don't grow out of it. Like the vast majority of the population don't grow out of it, which is why so few people can do this public speaking, auctioneering carry on.
So you've advocated that buyers, in preparation to go to auction, should be doing their research on the agent, should be doing their research on the auctioneer, also the property, obviously. But even obviously, you've also mentioned that people rock up in the half hour prior to the auction, never having seen the property before. So that often doesn't happen either. However, what's the point of researching the auctioneer?
Because they all have, we all have nuances, right? One big thing, it needs to be made very, very apparent, which sounds obvious, but it's so not obvious for a lot of people, is that auctioneers are human beings, and they will all have tells. They will all have giveaways. They will all have things that they do. You know how you said with like comedians, they've got their lines for certain situations and so on and so forth. Well, for a lot of auctioneers that don't focus on their craft so much, they will rely a little bit too heavily on that repertoire.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, you can, if you're clever and if you're observant, you can pick up on the certain lines and things that they do or things that they say when the shit's hitting the fan. Right. And and if you can be observant enough to pick up on a few tells, it's like playing poker, right? If you're observant enough to be able to look at your players across the table and see that they scratch their ear or something like that when they've got a hand, or when they've not got a hand, or when they're bluffing or something along those lines, then it allows you to play your hand to a much greater degree and with a much greater probability of success. So that's like a sort of second, like an elite level sort of way of playing it. And I think any buyer advocate that hasn't done that, then they need to go back to school and get their homework done in that regard. Because there's that much evidence kicking around. There's that many videos kicking around now.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much social proof with auctioneers. Like, you can't not find.
Yeah.
But with buyers, I think the primary thing with buyers is familiarizing yourself with the environment. Now, for example, me and my foreign accent, right? I sound a little bit weird. So if a buyer's coming to an auction, they find out that it's me that's calling it, right? Then it's probably not a bad idea to watch a few of my auctions online so that you can get a feel for how I rock and roll. Because if you can get a feel for how I rock and roll, when I do stuff, you're not going to feel either as intimidated, or because you've got a bit of knowledge behind you, you feel a little bit more in control of your game. And so I can't stress how helpful that can be, to just familiarize yourself with the vernacular that certain auctioneers use at certain times. And then, like I said, if you get really clever and really observant about it, then you can see when it's about to go south, and then you have an opportunity to capitalize on that.
Yeah, I mean, because at the end of the day, the auctioneer is also looking, like you mentioned earlier, looking at the body language of the buyers. I love watching buyers because I see, you can tell someone they're intimidating to other buyers until they hit their limit, and then they tell everyone, they show them all in their behavior. It's hilarious how someone can look so formidable and then so weak with a split second. And so I'm obviously looking for all that sort of stuff. And I watch how auctioneers play that. They'll recognise that. They'll recognise they're not actually my strongest bidder. Those person are over there. But what I'm going to do is get them to actually bid again because that weak person, because I know the strong one over there has got more, and like even though they're out, if I can entice them even with one more $1,000 bid, I've still managed to get another $2,000 from my vendor once the strong buyer comes in on top of them. So it's like I love watching that. I just think you have just been enticed. You've shown everybody that you're out. You've just been lured into putting more money on the table, not because you are ever going to pay it, but because all that auctioneer has done is made the other buyer pay more. That's all they've done is used you as a pawn to get the other buyer to pay more. And it's like, don't be used. But at the same time, I'm congratulating in my head the auctioneer for being good at their job, right? So, but there are mistakes that some auctioneers make, right? I've seen some shockers. So do you want to share some of those? I mean, you talk about going and researching auctioneers. If you get some of these shocking auctioneers, I mean, I'd love to hear some of your stories on this.
Honestly, if the buyers, there are certain auctioneers out there, and I do we auctioneers as a brother / sisterhood, we are a close knit bunch, but the auctioneer that's the group of auctioneers that actually care about their craft and treat it as a craft. Yeah. Right. So we're the ones that put it, like I literally call more auctions than about 98% of auctioneers in Victoria, statistically speaking. And I'll probably be doing more practice than any auctioneer. Like I'll be practicing way more than almost any other auctioneer in the game because of how much I love and appreciate the craft that I've been so fortunate to have found. Right. And then get paid for, which is even better.
I'm on a personal mission to help more people make better property decisions. And you can find out all about what I'm working on at veronicamorgan.com.au. And there you'll find resources for first home buyers, details about my buyer's agent mentoring program, access to suburb help for investors, or if you're looking to buy your dream home or an investment property in Sydney's inner west, eastern suburbs or lower North Shore, you can connect with my team at Good Deeds Property Buyers.
If you're thinking about buying your first home, upgrading to a new one, or purchasing an investment property anywhere in Australia, we would love to carefully guide you through this journey and importantly get the finance right. Please reach out via our website, wealthful.com.au.
Do you practice in front of a mirror? Like, how do you practice?
There's all sorts of stuff you can do. So I'm like, I'll trial lines, I'll replay auctions because again, I'll have video footage from at least one or two of my auctions, and I'll replay those, not to inflate my own ego because I'm dead good, but because I'll be looking for the elements, for the little bits that I could have done a little bit better, and I'll always be looking to just make those little 1% improvements or 5% improvements if I've if you sort of either misjudge a certain energy or scenario. The beautiful thing about our craft is the fact that we're dealing with 8 billion people and they're all wired differently. So there's no such thing as the perfect call. And that for me is incredible. I love that. I love the fact that there is no such thing as the perfect auction call because it means I can always have fun improving. But with a lot of auctioneers that don't practice their craft, they go to water very, very quickly. So one of the probably one of the more common mistakes that's getting made at the minute, because I'm finding the market that we are in, and bearing in mind this is sort of March to April 2024, the market that we're in right now, I'm finding a lot more Mexican standoffs at the minute, where we've got buyers, they're there, but they're all just, you can hear the sort of bells in the background like an old school Western movie, right? And you can, and you can see them all standing up, you can see them all staring at each other, and none of them wants to pull the trigger first, right? So as a result of that, though, if you as an auctioneer don't have the minerals to sit in that pocket of pressure for long enough, reselling, not silence, but reselling, engaging with onlookers, engaging with neighbors, creating a sense of activity, because activity breeds activity, and manufacturing that momentum, then you'll call a vendor bid way too quickly, way too early. And as soon as you do that, you as an auctioneer are on the back foot. You're on the back foot in a big way.
Yeah, let's dig into that a little bit because I think vendor bids aren't very well understood. Also, in different states, you have different legislation around vendor bids. Again, in New South Wales, you can only have one, right? In Victoria, you can have a number of them, right? Is there a limit? I can't remember. Is there? How many can they have?
No, there's not.
Yeah. Okay.
No, there's not.
Right. No limit. So you can basically, you just keep, and if you have your patter down, and you've got your repertoire really smooth and really good, you can almost pass off a vendor bid like it's a real person's bid, and no one sort of really realised, right? I've seen great auctioneers at work here, and I've seen some terrible auctioneers at work with the vendor bid, and it's a real, this is a vendor bid. And I've even had, I've even entered a little argy-bargy with, I remember one particular auction where I was like, and this vendor, I was the underbidder under the vendor bid, and then they're trying to get me to bid more, but the bid's here. And I said, no, it's not. The bid's with the vendor, and if the vendor wants to buy their house back, then they've done it, but I'm not paying that. So they didn't. They used a vendor bid in the middle of the auction, which was unnecessary because they could have just negotiated with me. I'm there to buy the thing, but I'm not there to get into horse trading. But thought I'd have a bit of fun while I was at it. However, but in Victoria, obviously you can use more than one vendor bid. So why would an auctioneer use it? How do you use it well, I guess is the question there.
So there's a few different scenarios. So for those of you that aren't quite sure what a vendor bid is, it's basically the auctioneer basically lighting the runway to a greater extent for you to come into land, right? It's just basically providing a better guide on value. Okay. Now, in terms and when I say better guide on value, a better guide on value as is pertaining to the reserve, essentially.
So you're trying to like you say, light the path. I mean, it's like you're giving hints as to, look, if you bid a bit over this, maybe you'll get it. Is that the intention?
Well, I suppose that's the old school Mad Men sort of 1990s version of that. But yeah, essentially, you're not far off, right? So, but it depends on the scenario as well. So, your traditional scenario that vendor bids get used is what I was mentioning before, which is when nothing's happening, and then we'll need to give a little bit of a guide on value via a vendor bid that will hopefully break the ice for people and give them a bit of a measuring stick. Now, decent auctioneers, before they do that, they'll always be recommending opening bids. They'll always be making suggestions as to where an opening bid should potentially be before they come windmilling in with their own bid on behalf of the vendor. But there's other scenarios as well. So, for example, a scenario that's perhaps a little bit more common than people give credit for sometimes is if you're in a situation where you've got maybe multiple bidders, let's say 3 or 4 bidders, and they're all going a little bit tit for tat. And then for some reason in the middle of the auction, you're facing a Mexican standoff, right? Now, it could, for some reason, it could just stop. And the challenge that the agent would have is the fact that the person that's holding the winning bidder, they might have a real confidence that there's another player that has got more in them according to their intel, right? So in that scenario, the highest bidder that is under the reserve and this is true of every state, you have the right to negotiate with the vendor, with the seller. So that's if you win, effectively win the auction, but don't win the property. Okay, so you don't meet the vendor's reserve, which is the benchmark that they set for the sale. Then in those scenarios, sometimes, and I've done this sometimes when, in order to sort of free up that right to negotiate and put it up for grabs again, I might suggest we do a vendor bid to reset the competition and start again, because that way, then I, as an auctioneer, go real on the offensive with the whole, that right to negotiate is worth its weight in gold. You've seen 4 of you have already tried to have a crack at buying this. Ultimately, we've only got one of these to sell. If you want to make sure that it's you that has the first crack, you really want to win that right to negotiate, because as a buyer, that is the best bit of legislation. If it doesn't meet the reserve, you want to use that right you want to be that person that has that right to negotiate, because psychologically speaking, the vendor's at a peak state. of wanting to sell. The malleability of a vendor when it comes to their price is probably at its highest right immediately after an auction, because they're in an emotional bloody whirlwind.
Let's pull this apart a little bit. The minute an auctioneer says that to me, I think, oh, that's fantastic. You want me to continue to compete, push past the point of natural competition because your vendor's got a high reserve, right? So I'm like, that's an interesting tactic. That just tells me the vendor's way off with the pixies. And I think, and I love that you're sort of trying to reset and re-pitch the idea of being first to negotiate. When you've got 4 bidders, you'd be going, hang on a minute, this is competition. Now you're trying to push me beyond market value. So that's me and my natural sort of other side of the coin looking at that behaviour. The other thing too is that when you've got, I see some agents and some auctioneers, I should say, some auctioneers come in, like you say, too early with the vendor bid, and the vendor bid's too high. It actually slams the door shut on every single buyer, and they're like, oh, if that's what they want, I'm walking. And I've seen auctions where with numerous people registered to bid, and the auctioneer has come in too fast, too hard with the vendor bid. And I thought, what the hell's going on there? Either there's some strangeness going on, or you've got inexperience or an inability to just a lack of skill, I guess, to take advantage of the fact you've got buyers there, ready, willing, and able to actually transact. Now, back to that right of the right of negotiation. Now, in New South Wales, I need to probably double check this legislation, but my understanding in New South Wales is that it's talked about as being a right of first refusal at the reserve price, which so effectively the right to negotiate for the highest bid is really a courtesy, and mostly that is offered and it is adhered to, but it's not. The right to negotiate isn't actually legislated. Now, is that legislated in Victoria? And if so, how long do they have that right for?
It is legislated in Melbourne that they do have exclusive rights to negotiate with the vendor one-on-one.
But what's the constraints on that?
How long?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the great part is the second bit, because there's no set time frame within the legislation. So and it is. This is why Melbourne, sometimes I wonder if I was dropped into the wrong town sometimes when it comes to auctioneering land, because it is probably the most ambiguous state when it comes to auctioneering rules and regs. Like I said, with your no bidder registration, you can do as many vendor bids as you want. You have this exclusive right to negotiate, but it isn't. There isn't a set time period on that. It's essentially, and this is where training with our agents is so imperative, that they define the time frame before anybody leaves, and then everybody's in agreement that this is the time frame that you've got, right? So for example, the time frame could just be from the time the highest bidder walks into the property to the time that they leave, having either bought the thing or walked away. Or it could be the fact that working with the seller, the agent might turn around and say, right, we're going to have 24 hours of negotiation here. Or, we're happy to give you the weekend to consider your next move, and we'll give you the courtesy of exclusivity on that. And just as a little sub note for buyers in Melbourne, I would really highly recommend that you get that in writing. Don't rely on verbal with that. Make sure you get it in writing, either via an SMS or an email, to say that you have got exclusive rights to negotiate with the vendor until 10 a.m. Monday or 5 p.m. Monday or 5 p.m. Sunday or whatever it is.
Because also the thing about auctions, you're buying an auction, if you're successful at buying an auction, you sign a contract, you pay a deposit, then it's unconditional. That you're buying under auction conditions. There's no changes, whatever you've pre-negotiated is what you get it at. Now, in New South Wales, for example, if you're buying before auction and you agree to waive the cooling off period, because it's very unusual. An agent is going to kill an auction campaign by selling to somebody in the middle of the auction campaign with a cooling off period. They're going to want to make sure that you're done and dusted if you make your pre-auction offer. And in New South Wales, You provide what's called a 66W certificate signed by your solicitor or conveyancer, and that waives the cooling off period. In Victoria, however, you've only got a window of opportunity 3 days, isn't it, before the auction, and then also 3 days after. So in New South Wales, it's auction conditions up till midnight on the day of the auction, but in Victoria, you sort of got this 6-day period, correct?
It's a bit weird. Yeah, it's a bit weird, and the tricky part has been, and this is where some agents can sometimes miss out a little bit, is that the technicality of the contract is that yes, those auction conditions until 3 days after the auction has occurred, but it doesn't necessarily stop an agent from entertaining an offer subject to finance if there's someone that's been chomping at the bit. They've not managed to get their full approvals done, but then the offer level that they're wanting to make is like light years beyond, or for example, like it could be miles above where that unconditional offer is. Now, if, like I said, if that highest bidder wins that right to negotiate, then they can't entertain that subject to finance offer until that exclusivity period draws to an end. But yeah, it doesn't necessarily need to be for three whole days. Like if there's an offer there that it has got a condition on it or a couple of conditions, but it's at a level that the seller is happy to take a punt on because of how much higher it is or whatever, then yeah, the technicality of an auction contract, it is 3 days before and 3 days prior, but it's not to say that you can't entertain anything really. I mean, at the end of the day, who's going to stop if a homeowner wants to take an offer that's a subject to finance offer? Who's going to stop them? Like, is Consumer Affairs going to come in and say, well, I'm sorry, but you can't accept that offer for your home? As if it's never going to stand up.
Oh, it's true. However, let's be real. So from a buyer's point of view, if you're in an auction campaign before the auction, or even if you're working with an agent in that cooling off period 3 days after in Victoria, and you are being offered the opportunity to buy it with conditions, then you've got to think one of two things. Either A, I'm paying way overs, or B, there's nobody else interested. So that's a warning for buyers.
100%. Oh, 100%. 100%. Absolutely. And if I was a buyer that was in one of those positions where I'm really keen on making an offer as soon as it passes in, I'm going to want to make damn sure that I'm there on the day, because I want to see what's going on. I want to actually be able to see exactly where it's ended, exactly what the go is, exactly how much interest it's got on it, because you're absolutely right. You don't want to leave yourself open to spending way overs. That's 100% correct. 100%.
Now let's talk about passing in, because agents sort of typically don't like to pass properties aside. It's nicer and easier and cleaner if you can sell it under the hammer. You got a deal done for starters.
The least amount of work.
Yeah, least amount of work. Yeah. You know you're going to get your commission in maybe 4-6 weeks time, whatever. And you don't have to then, go through the agony of trying to negotiate with buyers who might then feel like they've got the upper hand. But there's times when it is appropriate for vendors to for agents to pass a property in. And I know certainly, there are times when, as a buyer's agent, I will request that if I'm the highest bidder and I'm not going to negotiate under the hammer, I don't have to actually be here and negotiate publicly under that pressure and scrutiny. I can actually slow things down. I want to slow things down. I don't want them putting pressure on me.
Too right, you bloody do.
Yeah.
Too right, you do.
So, I'm not scared. I mean, the risk to passing it in is what I say to my clients as well. The risk is always there might be another buyer there who starts to enter the fray despite this exclusivity or whatever, or otherwise, it's if the offer's big enough, that exclusivity will evaporate pretty quickly. So I will talk to my clients about those risks, but at the same time, it's not huge risk. If you get to the point of passing it in, it's not huge risk that another buyer is going to suddenly come out of thin air. So what do you advise agents and buyers in terms of that whole passing in scenario? If they're bidding, if you've had bidding, that is.
Yeah, well, one of the first things that I say to all homeowners that I'm going to be fortunate enough to represent, one of the very first things I say to them is that my job on the auction is not to drop the hammer. My job as the auctioneer is to test the market to the best of our ability and to the best of its ability, and do everything that we can to ensure that we're maximizing the value of your biggest asset. Now, whether that be by going under the hammer or whether that be by passing it in and negotiating after the event, to me as an auctioneer, that should be irrelevant. As long as we're doing the right things to position the vendor and the asset in the best position possible to maximize the value of their biggest asset, right? My ego should play zero part.
It should.
My ego should play zero part in it should play zero part in deciding what the outcome of this thing is.
So when you get situations at auction, and a lot of buyers, you still hear this, I'll say, so is it on the market? Is it on the market? They get all heckly, and the auctioneers usually says, yes, sir, madam, it's been on the market for 4 weeks. You've been at every opportunity. Here you are. Do you want to buy it or not? All that sort of banter that goes on. But you do see there are times where you need to basically get it on the market, let buyers know this, yes, we have exceeded reserve. We are actually going to sell this property. And you can see sometimes that results in a flurry of competition. Other times you see that was it, that there's nothing more in it, right? So, you know, there is that with buyers. I mean, obviously, that's a fine line. You don't want buyers waiting for it to be on the market before they bid. But at the same time, you know that can happen. So how do you manage that as an auctioneer?
It's tricky because there are certain, and you know, and I've got this. I've been on record as saying this. This is in no way an affront in any way, shape, or form. There are certain cultures where they have it drilled into them to not bid until it's on the market.
Yeah. Well, that's
right?
I see that a lot of so-called experts. That's what they tell people. Like, well, guys, how's it going to get there? You know, like it's an auction.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
But it's not just the cultures, though. I mean, you've got, like you mentioned earlier, some people turn up thinking, oh, I'm only going to negotiate if it passes in. I think there's this idea that you have to have the upper hand in order to buy a property. If I don't have the upper hand, I won't buy it.
It's just silly. But there are certain demographics that are like predictable to a crazy level. Like you can read them like a book in terms of the pattern that they are going to be bidding in.
Right.
It's very, very obvious at times, right? Tremendously obvious. And I'm absolutely with you. And I said this to a buyer just last week actually, and he was really keen on this place. And I said to her, look, the one big mistake that you don't want to make is not getting involved. If you don't get involved, then you're not going to have any influence on the thing in any way, shape, or form, and you're completely at the mercy of it. Like that's the worst thing that you want to have happen, is that you get caught up in it and you're completely at the mercy of it, and you're like a deer in the headlights, and you're screwed. Right? Yeah, that's the worst position that you possibly want to be in, because then your anxiety is like all-time high. But for a lot of buyers, that you see it and you hear it and you feel it, and I've got the perfect example as to why that is possibly one of the dumbest things you can do. Because I was at a property, it was only about 5 weeks ago actually, and it had plenty of people there. The intel that I got was that there was five bidders, and they're keen, right? Mexican standoff ensues, and they're all thinking, and even one of them even said to me, "Oh, look, I'm waiting till it passes in because that means I'll be able to negotiate more." I'll be like, "You're an idiot," but okay. All right. And sure as eggs is eggs. I did a vendor bid. I did a couple of vendor bids, passed the thing in there, and with a final bid. And I refer to that as a benchmark bid, because I say not 1 cent is going to get considered under that, so on and so forth. Within 5 minutes, it was a 4-bedroom home, and within 5 minutes, each of the guest bedrooms, so that each of the 3 guest bedrooms had a different buyer in it writing an offer. Now, we passed that property in at 1.61, right? I feel, without knowing, I feel that property could have probably sold at around 1.65. But because those buyers didn't even have a crack, didn't even try, and they waited until afterwards to try and negotiate. Then they got caught because there was and it was obvious. It was plain as day. It was like Piccadilly Circus in the house, right? And as a result of that, the winning buyer probably cost themselves about 50 grand because they went for 1.7 because they panicked. And all of a sudden, they're like going into a sword fight blindfolded.
Yeah.
You're going to get cut. You're going to get hurt. And that's happening. That's happening way more often than what it should. But whether it's ego or ignorance or just people thinking, and again, the industry's only got itself to blame in this respect to a large degree, because of shoddy behaviors and whatnot. People just don't believe that that's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, and every week I'll have an example where the next week I'll say, don't say I didn't warn you. And when my words are ringing in your ears,
Cha-ching.
So,
so is that your dumbo? Or have you got another one for your property dumbo?
That is my dumbo. Yeah.
Yep.
I couldn't believe that when that happened. There was a crowd of about 50, 60 people, and it was obvious that there was players there. And then they all come like scuttling into the house, and we go, right, you could go to that bedroom, you go to that bedroom, you go to that bedroom, and bless them, the agents didn't have enough iPads to bloody fill out the offers and stuff, right? And they were because it was all technology and all that sort of jazz. But it was, and that's been a very, very common mistake with buyers right now, is they don't play to the rules as best as well as what they could. And just having an awareness.
I can tell you this is not a recent thing. As you were telling me that story, I recalled a property that I sold back when I was a selling agent. This is back in 2001. So we're talking 23 years ago. And I remember this particular auction. And, it had been a hot year, but then this was just after September 11. So obviously everyone was a bit nervous and shaky. And I had 3 registered bidders, none of whom would make a bid. Like they just all sat on their hands, wouldn't do a thing. And in the afternoon, 2 of them came back to me and said, we want to make an offer on the property. And I'm like, this is excellent. I said, you have the opportunity to buy today, but I've got 2 of you, and I'm going to go back and forth between the 2 of you until the last one standing. And that's what we're going to do. One of them actually got a building and pest inspection done in the afternoon. And I was up in the house with one buyer, the ones that had the building and pest inspection done, and I'd be going down to the car and I'd be calling the other buyer. And I just tell them, you have to give me 10. Okay, you got 10, great. Go back upstairs. You have to give me another 10. And I was controlling the number of the bids. They had no idea whether I was telling the truth or not. I was, but they had no idea. They had to trust me, otherwise they were going to lose it. Yeah. And and we sold it that afternoon for, I can't remember the exact price. I think it was a little bit more than what we really thought we were going to get at auction, had they all bid the same, and they had to compete, and they had to compete blind. So this is not a recent thing. As I said, that's 23 years ago. Listen, Andy, that's been an interesting chat. Is there any lasting message that you'd want to leave for buyers in particular that are looking at bidding at auction, and a big mistake to avoid before we wrap this up?
Yeah, I think don't rely too heavily on the clearance rates in terms of how that dictates the way that you operate as a buyer in the marketplace. Just because clearance rates drop, it doesn't mean that every situation is going to be in trouble, right? And it's on the other side as well. Just because clearance rates rise doesn't mean that you have to shit yourself and spend butt tons more money, right? Necessarily. The clearance rate, all it does is provide a very vague, because depending on which data set you look at, it determines what the clearance rate actually is. So no one can even make their mind up on that.
Well, it's also for the whole of the city, not one, even one
it blows
suburb.
My mind. It blows my mind how much the media focus on that one singular number to give a barometer as to how well or badly a market's going. Play the situation in front of you as it is. Don't be dictated by generalized macro information, because it leads too many buyers down the garden path when it comes to how they should or shouldn't bid. And they see clearance rates drop, and then I'll see the same buyer 4 auctions later going, I wish I'd just gone a bit harder on the second one. Right. So like they really, really need to just try and cut out a lot of the macro noise and focus in on the job that's right in front of them, because it's not just the numbers that dictate. You know, the vendor, as you know full well, right? It's like the vendor situation plays a huge part in how well this thing goes or not, and whether it goes on fire or whether it just drops on the face of the earth or whatever. Right? There's too many variables for you to be dictated to when it comes to the numbers.
It's very true, and in fact, what is not often spoken about, a clearance rate is not just how many properties sold over reserve or were negotiated to sell under reserve on the auction day, but it's how many vendors met the market. So it's not just about buyers, it's also about vendors meeting the market. So that's exactly right. And I think that, you know, understanding really what clearance rates mean is very important. But the other thing that what you're saying there is that you're choosing an individual property, and some properties are competitive even in slow markets and others are not, and others should not be competitive, and they're only competitive because the market's red hot. So by understanding how to assess an individual property, then you're making decisions on that, what you got in front of you as you're talking about there. So anyway, that's been a really interesting chat, Andy. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate that.
No, it's been an absolute pleasure. I love these open conversations, because at the end of the day, if we can create a greater level of reality to some of these conversations, then it might actually get more of us on the same page of all the various parts of the machine, like buyer, seller, agent, auctioneer, advocate, whatever, might actually get us all on the same page and operating to the same hymn sheet, which would be wonderful. I've actually... last week, because I bought, and this is in a play to try and improve the transparency again in the education process, I actually bought a pair of Ray-Ban Meta specs, so that people are going to soon be able to watch the auction and hear the auction from my eyes.
Through your eyeballs.
So they'll be able to see. Yeah, so I put a little example clip on my LinkedIn last week, and I've done a mashup and things like that. But the quality of the output and the input means that I'll soon enough I'll be able to take bids from my specs from people that are in the middle of bloody wherever.
Wow,
which is
next level.
Fascinating.
Well, yeah, I'd love it if you could share the link to that sample footage, and we could pop it in the show notes.
I'll flick it through.
Yeah, cool. All right, thank you so much for that, Andy. And I'm sure we'll get an opportunity to speak again.
If you have a question that you'd like us to answer in an upcoming Q&A episode, you can send us a voicemail or written question via the website, theelephantintheroom.com.au, or you can email us directly at questions@theelephantintheroom.com.au. If you like what you're hearing, please share this episode with others you feel would benefit. And while you're at it, why not leave us an iTunes review? 5 stars would be great. I know that sounds a bit cringy, but we have it on good authority that every review helps make it easier for other people to find out about us and hear what our amazing guests have to say.